The Core Directive. Part 1. The Signal. Dr. Elena Voss had spent 11 years studying the seismic data from Mars, and in all that time, she had never seen anything like what appeared on her screen at 3:47 a.m. The InSight lander's successor, a deep drilling probe called Persephone, had been sent to the Martian core 3 years earlier. Its mission was simple: measure heat flow, map the boundary between the planet's molten outer core and its strange, unmoving inner core. Mars wasn't supposed to have plate tectonics. It wasn't supposed to have a magnetic field anymore. It certainly wasn't supposed to have a structure, buried nearly 3,000 kilometers beneath the rust-colored dust, that pulsed with a rhythm too regular to be natural. Elena stared at the waveform. It repeated every 11.6 hours, like clockwork. Not an earthquake. Not thermal expansion. A signal. She called her supervisor, Dr. Amir Rashid, at an hour she knew would infuriate him. "This had better be good," he grumbled through the phone. "Amir, I think there's something inside Mars. Something built." There was a long silence. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Don't send this to anyone else. I'm coming in." Part 2. Excavation Zero. What followed was 6 months of quiet, coordinated secrecy across 3 space agencies: NASA, ESA, and the newly formed Indo-Pacific Space Consortium. Officially, the joint mission was called Excavation Zero, a core sampling initiative. Unofficially, among the 200 scientists and engineers who knew the truth, it was called the Vault. The structure was enormous, nearly the size of Manhattan, embedded at the boundary between Mars's molten outer core and its solid inner core, roughly 3,000 kilometers below the surface. It was shielded by materials no one recognized, materials that didn't appear on the periodic table in any combination human chemistry could explain. And it was old. Radiometric dating on trace elements near the structure suggested an age of 4 billion years, older than complex life on Earth. Elena was assigned to the exobiology and materials team, alongside a wiry, sleep-deprived astrophysicist named Kenji Osei, who had been the one to translate the pulsing signal into something resembling a language. "It's not a language," Kenji told her one night in the cramped mission control module on Mars orbit. "It's a countdown." Elena felt her stomach drop. Counting down to what? "I don't know yet. But it's accelerating." Part 3. The Discovery. 3 months into the excavation, the drilling robots, autonomous machines built to withstand pressures that would crush a submarine like a soda can, finally broke through an outer shell of the structure. What they found inside defied every model of the mission. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a ship. It was a weapon. The engineers who first analyzed the schematics beamed back from the drone cameras described it in hushed, disbelieving tones. A device capable of destabilizing a planet's core, triggering a chain reaction that would tear the mantle apart from the inside, turning an entire world into a field of debris within hours. A planet killer. And it wasn't alien technology, not exactly. The materials were unfamiliar, but the underlying physics, once decoded, was chillingly close to theories humanity itself had proposed decades earlier in classified defense research. Too close. "This wasn't left by an alien civilization," Amir said during an emergency briefing beamed to a small, secure circle of officials on Earth. "Or if it was, they left it as a message. Because parts of this design match human research from the 1980s. Cold War doomsday the rising. Someone, or something, knew what we would eventually think of, decades before we thought of it." The room went silent. "Are you saying we built this?" asked a stone-faced representative from the consortium. "I'm saying," Amir replied carefully, "that someone built this to look like something we would build. And they hid it somewhere they knew would eventually go looking, once we were advanced enough to find it, and just barely advanced enough to be tempted to use it." Part 4. The Countdown. Kenji's countdown theory turned out to be correct, and far more urgent than anyone wanted to admit. The pulsing signal wasn't random. It was an activation sequence, embedded in the deep structure of the weapon itself, triggered, as far as the team could reconstruct, by the drilling operation. Excavation Zero hadn't just found the weapon. It had woken it up. "We have 41 days, Kenji told the assembled team, his voice flat with exhaustion, "before the sequence completes." "And then what?" Elena asked, though she already knew. "And then Mars becomes an asteroid field." The immediate question, evacuate or intervene, split the mission down the middle. Some argued for a full withdrawal, pull every human off Mars, let the countdown finish, and simply watch from a safe distance as the red planet died a second death, this one final and complete. Others, Elena among them, argued that a weapon built with such staggering precision could not have been left without a way to stop it. No one builds a lock without leaving a key somewhere, even if the key is hidden. Think about it, she argued in the war room, 3 sleepless days after the countdown was confirmed. This structure has survived 4 billion years without detonating on its own. That's not the geological stability of an accident. That's a fail-safe. Something has been holding this weapon dormant that whole time, and we may have just switched off the very thing that was keeping it asleep. Amir looked at her for a long moment. You think there's an off switch? I think there has to be. Part 5. Into the dark. The decision to send a crewed team into the vault itself, rather than relying on drones with limited dexterity and no real judgment, was the most controversial of the entire mission. But with 31 days remaining and the drone probes returning data too fragmented to interpret quickly enough, there was no other option. Elena volunteered. So did Kenji. So did a third engineer, a soft-spoken Brazilian propulsion specialist named Rafael Duarte, who had spent the last decade designing the very habitat modules that would keep them alive 3,000 kilometers beneath the Martian surface, in a heat-shielded descent capsule that had never been tested at this depth, because no one had ever imagined needing to go this deep. The descent took 19 hours. Elena spent most of it in silence, watching the temperature readout climb past what any unshielded human body could survive, trusting a hull of exotic alloy she barely understood to keep her alive. When the capsule finally settled onto the excavated floor of the vault, the 3 of them stepped out into a chamber lit by a faint, ambient glow that came from the walls themselves, a chamber built by hands, or something like hands, for billion years before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from the trees. At the chamber's center stood the weapon, a lattice of interlocking rings, slowly rotating, each ring inscribed with symbols that shifted and rearranged as the countdown pulsed through them like a heartbeat. And beside it, half hidden in shadow, was something the drones had never detected, a second, smaller structure. Simpler, quieter, waiting. That's not part of the weapon, Kenji said, staring at his instruments in disbelief. That's something else entirely. Part 6. The choice. The second structure was, as Elena had gambled, a failsafe, but not the kind anyone had expected. It wasn't a shutdown switch. It was a message, encoded not in mathematics or signal pulses but in something closer to memory. Images, impressions, emotions embedded directly into the material, readable only through direct physical contact. When Raphael, the only one of the 3 willing to risk it, placed his palm against the surface, he didn't speak for almost a full minute. When he finally did, his voice was shaking. It's not a weapon left by an enemy, he said. It's a weapon left by a civilization that built it against themselves. A failsafe against their own worst impulses. They hid it here, dormant, because they couldn't bring themselves to destroy something so powerful, and they couldn't trust themselves to keep it, either. So they buried it on a dead world, sealed it, and left one condition for waking it fully, that whoever found it would have to prove, deliberately, that they didn't want it. Prove how? Elena asked.
Rafael swallowed.
By choosing to destroy the trigger mechanism instead of studying it. By choosing to walk away from the power instead of trying to understand or control it. Kenji's readout showed 19 days remaining. The temptation to instead study the weapon, to reverse engineer 4 billion years of unknown physics, to bring home secrets that could reshape human civilization, was, Elena knew, going to be a harder pullback on Earth than it was here, in this glowing chamber, staring at the thing that could unmake a world. If we are wrong, Kenji said quietly, if this is a trick, or if the failsafe doesn't work the way he thinks it does, we don't get a second chance. If we are right, Elena said, and we don't act, Mars ends up as a debris field, and every human being on this mission dies believing we should have tried to save it. They looked at each other in the half-light. Then, together, the 3 of them walked to the trigger mechanism, a small, unassuming node at the base of the rotating lattice, and did the one thing every instinct in their scientific training screamed against. They destroyed it, rather than study it. Part 7. Silence. For 11 seconds, nothing happened. Elena would remember counting them, one by one, certain each one would be her last. Then the rotating rings slowed. The pulsing countdown, which Kenji had tracked obsessively for weeks, flickered and stopped. The ambient glow of the chamber dimmed to a soft, steady light, no longer urgent, no longer counting down to anything at all. The weapon was still there. It hadn't vanished, hadn't dissolved into nothing the way it might in fiction. It simply went quiet, dormant again, the way it had been for 4 billion years before humanity's drills had disturbed it. Back on the surface, when the news reached Earth, it triggered exactly the response Elena had feared. Intelligence agencies from a dozen nations demanded access to the vault, eager to study what remained even if the trigger was gone. The debate over what to do with the structure, study it under strict international oversight, seal it permanently, or destroy it entirely, would occupy diplomats and scientists for years to come. But Elena, Kenji, and Raphael, sitting together in the Ascent capsule as it began its 19-hour climb back toward the Martian surface, found themselves agreeing on one thing without needing to discuss it. Whatever civilization had buried that weapon inside Mars had understood something that humanity was still, achingly, in the process of learning, that the hardest part of holding power was never obtaining it. It was knowing when to let it go. Epilogue. Years later, when Elena gave lectures about Excavation Zero, by then declassified, though heavily redacted, she was often asked the same question by students. Did she regret not studying the weapon further, not learning everything it might have taught humanity about physics, about power, about the civilizations that came before? She always gave the same answer. We didn't hide a discovery back inside Mars that day. We honored one. Some doors are built to be found, so that someone, someday, has the choice to close them again. End of story. Approximate 2,650 words, tilde 15 minutes narration at average reading pace.